Now, I really want to hop in to the main part of this course, and I don't know, I'm really excited to start actually editing together with you. So, for this first main learning lesson, what we're going to be doing is focusing on the first aspect of editing, which is creating your rough edit. Now, we're going to start by doing something that's really easy for all skill levels. We're going to start simple and then we're going to build our way throughout this course from concepts and techniques that are easy to more advanced. So, from beginner to intermediate to advanced. So, depending on your skill level and what you want from this course, you can follow along to this less complex section, or you can skip ahead as you wish, whatever is best for you. But I'd highly recommend going through this course front to back because that's really how it's designed. And so, to get into this section, you're going to follow along with me and you're going to edit footage from your phone. So you're going to choose a recent trip, a recent memory, a recent anything that really sparks your interest. It's maybe it's been sitting on your phone. We all have smartphones these days with pretty decent cameras. So I really thought this would be perfect exercise to kind of get the ball rolling. But it can really be anything that you have that has at least 5 to 10 shots that you can work with. Secondly, we're going to transfer the footage from the device and we're going to edit side by side together. So we'll be diving into editing workflow, creating backups to keep all your projects safe, the project files themselves, editing your main sequence, pulling your selects, and then refining your edit. And after this section, you can export and share your video URL, whether that's a YouTube URL, Vimeo URL, Dropbox, Google Drive, whatever it is. You can post it on the assignment at the end of this section. So we are now going to dive into your editing workflow. And basically what we're going to do here is I'm going to show you how to create a clean workspace, okay? It's really important to have the laptop that you're working on, computer that you're working on, phone that you're editing on, whatever it is. We're going to have things organized so that as you build in skill level, you're going to really build a good structure and a good routine now so that that can grow with you and you really have good habits. So it's really important. We're going to spend some time to now organize our footage so that our edit starts to flow seamlessly. So let's do that now. The first step is to pull the footage off our cards that we've already shot. In this case, because we're doing something we can all edit together with, is that we're going to be grabbing the footage off our phone. So I'm going to do that now. All right, so as you can see, I have my footage already in an album. So if you haven't already kind of collected the video files that you want to use for this learning exercise, you can go ahead and pause the course and you can go ahead and do that now. So now that I have all of my video files selected, and this is just kind of like a little bonus tip on how I transfer content. Like I said, so much of us are shooting now on our phones, photo and video. And the best way I found to transfer that content is to airdrop rather than having to plug in your device and go through all that stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all my videos here. I'm going to hit share and then I'm going to go to airdrop and then boom, there's my laptop. Okay, I'm going to click the device and this is going to start sending all the footage that I'm going to edit with, right? The very first step, which is capturing the content that you've shot. It's going to transfer it from my filming device to the equipment that I'm going to be editing on. Perfect. So that just finished transferring to my laptop. Now that we did a little mini side course tangent on how to actually get the footage from our phone to what we're editing on, you can see here I have the different kind of content I shot on a recent trip to Mount Shasta. So the very first thing we want to do is to create a folder where our whole edit is going to take place. So I'm going to title this Mount Shasta Edit. Okay. And inside this main folder that we create is going to encapsulate all of the content that's involved: the audio, the music, the visuals, the pictures, everything. Okay. So inside this folder, we're going to create subfolders that keep everything very organized. So inside that folder, I want you to create a footage folder. And then I want you to create an editing folder. I'm using Premiere. So I always personally title the folder that is holding all the editing assets, because these are going to be separate. Your original video and audio files is one asset for your edit, and the editing files are the basic like signpost and little connection things that your editing software is doing. Your editing software is always using the original footage, so you have to keep them organized and safe in their own respective place. So going to make a Premiere file. You can name this something like project files, editing files, whatever helps you instantly know that this is the folder where all your important editing assets belong. And if I hop back over here to our slides, you can see we created our folder with our project name, our editing folder, and there's a few other folders that, because this is one of our initial edits we're doing together, it's much more on the simple side. So we don't really have all these different complex subfolders to create. We don't need to really mark the day, the scene, A roll coverage, B roll coverage. Those are things we'll get into more as we get onto more complex edits. So the next step that I'm going to do here is highlight all of the footage that we dragged onto the laptop that's now ready to be categorized. So throwing all of that in the footage folder. And next up, we're actually going to create our actual editing file. So like I said, I'm personally using Premiere, but this is going to be the same exact process for whatever editing software that you're using, whether that's Final Cut or Premiere or any of the other ones. So go ahead and make your way to your editing software. Perfect. So now that we have our editing file open, we're going to create a brand new project. Okay, now I'm going to title this the name of my trip, Mount Shasta Edit. Okay, perfect. And now that we put in the title of our project, remember that folder that we created that we said all the editing assets were going to go? Okay, that's where we're going to go to now. So go ahead and hit browse or select or find folder, whatever that looks like for you. Go ahead and choose the location, Mount Shasta Edit, select, and boom, Premiere. This is where all the assets are going to go. Choose. Perfect. And then we're going to hit OK. So now we have our editing file. And the next step here is to drag in the footage that we're going to be editing for this project. So I'm going to go to Finder. I'm going to go to my footage that we've selected. And I'm going to drag that into the project window. And before we actually get into our edits, now that we have things organized, it's always a good idea to back up your content on two, dang, two separate locations. Okay. So I have all the originals that we just worked with directly on my laptop. Now, what I'm going to do is create a backup folder on a separate hard drive in a separate location so that we have two copies of the same information, so that just in case, none of it ever gets lost. No matter how big or small your project is, I always recommend taking the time to do this extra step. And even though it takes up a little bit of extra room, I know it's kind of frustrating because we can run out of space quickly on hard drives. It's going to be worth it in the long run. So let's do that now. So I'm going to open up a new window, and I'm going to go to my hard drive, and I'm going to go to create a new folder, and I'm going to title it Mount Shasta Backup. Okay. And then once you've done that, we go to our original folder, And you can either copy the entire folder or copy the contents inside the folder. It's really up to you. It does the same thing. But what I did there is I copied the information in the folder, and now I'm going to paste it into our backup folder on a completely separate drive. And so now that we've gotten the basic logistic side of capturing our content, what I want to first show you is an actual final edit with the footage that I'm going to be working with, so you can kind of get an idea of where we're going to be heading in this learning exercise for the rest of this learning exercise. And you can see where we're going, and then we're going to build it from square one together. So let's check it out. Now that was a waterfall. Cool. So you can get a feel for what we're kind of going for here. And I also wanted to mention it's very simple cutting, very straightforward cutting. And majority of this edit, we want to be using the raw audio just to kind of understand how to, you know, get used to just using raw audio. And then later in the course, we're going to get into, actually, I think it's in the next learning exercise, we're going to get into more adding in extra sound design and extra audio. Let's now start from the very beginning by creating our sequence. Now, there's a few different ways you can do this. If I enlarge the project panel here on Premiere, we can see that the frame rate of our footage here, mainly it's 29.97. That's the average frame rate for most smartphones. Some of them in here are slightly different frame rates. I think that's because they came from, okay, yeah, that's because they were boomerangs from Instagram. So it's going to be a different frame rate. That's not that big of a deal. And then we can also see here our resolution. See, for this scenario, I shot all this footage vertical. So yours will either likely be 1080 by 1920. That's 1080 pixels wide by 1920 pixels vertical. The standard 16 by 9 aspect ratio is the exact opposite, which is 1920 by 1080. I know that I'm going to want to do it as a vertical aspect ratio so that it'll show up on social media as the vertical format, just like the way you hold your phone vertically. So what I'm going to do is choose the video file that has the frame rate and the resolution that I know I want the rest of my sequence to be. And the reason we're doing that is because whatever sequence settings you have, when you drag in your other footage, it's going to basically adhere to those original sequence settings. Make sense? Okay. So what I'm going to do is click that video file that I want the sequence from. I'm going to right click it and I'm going to click new sequence from clip. So now what this did is two things. It brought in my video file into my new sequence and it default labeled my sequence the name of the video file that I used to create that sequence. So we want to do something here. And that thing we want to do is title this sequence, as you can see with the little symbols, that these are all video files. That's a boomerang, so it shows up as a slightly different video file icon. And this icon here is the sequence icon. Now, it's a little bit confusing just taking a glance at this. We can't really find our main sequence very quickly. So what we always want to do is title our sequence. Generally, I personally title it main sequence. You'll see why we do that. But you can title it main edit, main footage, whatever you want it to be. And now what I'm going to do is drag that sequence outside of the footage folder. And to keep things even more organized, we're going to make a sequences folder. Because as we build this out, you're going to find out that we're going to have multiple different sequences, especially the more complex your edits get. Okay, so let's go to our main sequence here. You can see we have our first video file that's dropped into our edit. Now, if we go to our footage, we're simply going to highlight the rest of our video files from our footage folder, and we're going to drag that in as well. Okay, so as you can see, like I was mentioning, some of the video files are different settings. That's why we chose the sequence. That's why we chose the file that we wanted to create the sequence settings from, but the ones that were different aren't fitting. So the next step to fix that is to highlight these files, and the easiest way to do it is to scale it to frame size. What that's just saying is you're saying that I want the computer to take the size of this other stuff that doesn't match the sequence settings. Sorry, this is confusing, but it all makes sense. Doesn't match the sequence settings. You click scale the frame size or set the frame size. Boom. That's going to automatically snap it to fit the rest of your sequence. Okay. And I'm going to kind of just skip forward ahead here and see if there's any other ones that aren't matching. And yep, we have this one here. It looks like it was shot on a different phone. So I'm going to hit scale to frame size. And I think there's one more here. And I'm going to hit scale to frame size. Now you can see that this did something interesting here. Because this is a normal horizontal aspect ratio clip here, what it did is it scaled the edges of the video to the edges of the sequence. Now that's a problem in this case because if it was rotated this way and it scaled it up, it would have fit perfectly, right? But this is shot at a different aspect ratio. So when I hit scale to frame size, it's still leaving these black bars at the bottom and the top of the screen. So in this very specific scenario, this is where you will select that clip, go up to motion, and you'll scale it up manually, as you can see. Now that we've gotten everything set up in our editing software, the next step is going to be pulling our selects. And simply put, pulling your selects is choosing the shots that are going to be in the video and taking out the shots that aren't going to be in the video. So, for example, if you have something with multiple takes, in this stage, you're going to be taking out the best version that you want and cutting out the rest. This is all about building your foundation of your edit. It's not about making the actual rough cut yet or something that's viewable or ready to be seen by friends, families, clients, whatever it is. And so there's two fundamental ways to do this. The first way is by labeling the clips in your project window or by cutting the clips in the timer. Labeling your footage in the viewer allows for kind of more precise editing, but really keeps track of exact shots where they are by labeling them. And the second way, which is bringing everything into the timeline, which is what we've done, and then pulling selects is a lot quicker and a lot more practical. I personally like this timeline method. It's way easier to put the clips in order, and then I use color to kind of categorize them in the timeline, which is what we're going to walk through here. And a nice little extra tip is that once we've pulled our selects, we're going to actually create a backup sequence of that timeline sequence of selects. So let's get into this process. Now, like I mentioned, the first and my least favorite way to pull selects is to double click them in your project window and kind of scrub through here and say, okay, cool. This is that crystal cave place that I was shooting at. So, okay, if we go to the part that we want to use, let's say that we want to start here. I'm going to hit I, and that's going to create an in point on this clip. I'm going to let it play here. Okay, I like that. And let's say I want to cut right there. I'm going to hit O, which is going to create an out point on the clip. Then the next step of this cutting method would be to click that original file and title it in your project window. So let's say Crystal Cave, and I think these are called stalactites. Wait, stalactites and stalagmites. One, huh? Yeah. Well, okay. Stalag, stalag things. Let's just say that. Okay. Still, no, no. Yeah. Now I have these labeled right here. And if we move to the next clip, okay, cool. This is that kind of boomerang that I did at sunset. So we'll say boomerang at sunset. And as you can see, if I were to go through and do this to every single clip that I want to use, I would have a kind of a more library categorized by letters version of where all my clips are. Okay. The second option, and is my much more my favorite, a lot more practical, a lot more easy, is to have all this footage here in the sequence and scrub through it. And I'm going to do that same process, but it's actually going to be happening in the timeline. And your timeline is where your video takes place. So we can scrub through. Let's say I want to start at this point here. I'm going to hit C to bring up my blade tool, and I'm going to click to create a cut. Then I'm going to delete that extra footage that we're not going to use. And a little bit of a hack here is to hold Alt when you hit delete. What this is going to do is create what's called a ripple delete, which essentially is going to take out this empty space. Okay. So another way to do that is to hit delete on what we don't want, and you right click and you see how it highlights that empty space. Boom, ripple delete. So a ripple delete is essentially taking out what you don't want, but then scooting over the entire sequence to fill that empty space of what you just took out. I'm then going to scrub through, and right about there, I'm going to create another cut. And really what you're looking for here in pulling these selects is finding that good 2 to 3 second moment. Could be 10 seconds, could be 1 second. It really depends on the shot type. But there's always going to be, and as an editor, you're keeping in mind what you want the viewer to be seeing. So for any shot that you're shooting, there's always going to be a beginning and an end. And it's kind of it's a feeling that you'll have. But if I undo what we did here, this is not the best example, but it should work for what we're doing. If I hit play, you can see there's kind of an intro that's going here, not much happening. And then we start this nice vertical movement, and you see, wow, look at this cave. And then the pan and the tilt that I was doing by hand with the camera stops, and then it starts heading the other way. So to me, when I'm seeing that, I'm seeing the end of the first shot, and I'm actually seeing the beginning of a different shot. This is kind of a different shot, right? That's a totally different shot. So you kind of have in this situation and with your own footage, you'll see you have two different options for one shot, or very much one clear option, or it's going to be different for every single kind of shot, but it's very clear here that not much going on, not much going on, and then boom, as I'm tilting up, okay, that's where I want my clip to start. I play it through, it's interesting, I'm looking, there's a lot to see, and then boom, it kind of ends there and the camera starts to go a different way. If I really wanted to continue that shot, it's possible. If there was something else that was important that happened at this point, then we would keep it in. But in this phase of pulling selects, we want to really trim out what we're not going to use. So because I know this is the end of the shot, I'm going to create that cut, and just kind of pan through it to make sure I'm not missing anything interesting. And then I know I'm not, so I'm going to ripple delete.